Dark psychology. The practical uses and best defenses of psychological warfare in everyday life. How to detect and defend against manipulation, deception, dark persuasion, and covert NLP. Published by James W. Williams. Introduction. Do you feel like you are just a pawn in someone else's chess game? Are you tired of being manipulated at every turn? Would you like to be able to detect and discern genuine emotions in others so that you can protect yourself from being emotionally abused and manipulated? Then this is just the book you need. Dark psychology. The practical uses and best defenses of psychological warfare in everyday life helps you understand more than just the basics of human behavior. It takes you on an in-depth journey that explores the darker recesses of the human mind and provides insightful practical steps on how to build up your mental defenses against such. Inside this video, you will learn fundamental facts about dark psychology, how to recognize and separate truth, even when it has been masked masterfully in a web of lies, aspects of your day-to-day life that makes you vulnerable to the manipulations of others, a 5-step program to help you break free if ever find yourself a victim, how to protect yourself from the influences of dark psychology. If you or any of your loved ones have suffered emotionally or is currently living through a nightmare that is directly related to the inherent dangers of dark psychology, this is a book you want to read. And even if you are simply curious about how dark psychology works and would like to know how to protect yourself, this is a book that breaks down this complex phenomenon in the simplest terms. Dark psychology is not a novel concept, so this book is not about any groundbreaking discoveries. However, it has always been discussed in hushed tones, and there is still so much information out there that has gotten lost in barely understandable psychobabble that leaves you more perplexed than informed. This book does an effective job of demystifying dark psychology and equips you with the knowledge that you can use to protect yourself against it. So if you're ready, flip over to the next page and get ready to change your life. Why I wrote this book. Growing up, we lived next door to this vibrant lady who can only be described as the sweetheart of the neighborhood. It would seem like she always had a smile on her face and a kind word for everyone, whether child or adult. I cannot remember a single encounter with her that was ever in the slightest bit unpleasant. And this was more than just a childhood impression of a person. The whole neighborhood felt the same way about her. The only dark clouds I could see around her was the fact that she was alone. No kids, no boyfriends, and not much family. She ran this tiny art and craft store that was pretty popular in the area, and I think she seemed contented and happy with that. When my Nana passed on, she was one of the few neighbors who brought in food every day for more than a week. From that moment on, she was more than just a friendly neighbor. She became family. Fast forward to 2 years later, we heard the news that she was getting married soon. My mom and her friends had tried to fix her with some of the locals, but nothing worked. So, news of her pending marriage was very welcome. We didn't know much about the suitor, only that he was fighting on the front lines and was madly in love with her. If it was possible for this sweet woman's smile to become brighter, it certainly did. I remember my mom using the expression, walking on air, to describe her mood. A month or two to the wedding, she put up a for sale sign on her store and her home. Sayed she and her fiancé are working towards making a down payment for their new home, and they wanted to make sure that things were put in place before the wedding date arrived. A week before the wedding, the house and the store were sold. She wired the money to her fiancé and redirected her focus to finalizing the wedding preparations. My parents invited her to spend the days leading up to the wedding in our home. It was supposed to be our family's gift to her. 2 days to the wedding, her fiancé called, and we all took turns speaking with him. He had a strange accent, but we didn't give it too much thought after she explained that he had spent more than a decade in the Middle East. Apart from the accent, he generally sounded like a good guy. The next day, she tried reaching him to find out his whereabouts, but she was unable to get through. She started to worry, but my mom and dad reassured her and told her he was probably on a flight back to the country. She tried to find comfort in that, but you could tell that she was worried. Every time she tried to smile, she faltered. She clung desperately to the phone, and each time it rang, she jumped in fright. By the morning of the wedding, there was still no call from him. What started out as a beautiful day was beginning to look like a nightmare. My dad kept checking the local stations for any news on a missing flight, or maybe a plane crash. Mom was doing all she could to stop the tears. By the time the day was over, the wedding didn't look any different from a funeral. The only thing missing was the dead body. Overnight, this thriving and much-loved businesswoman wound up broke, homeless, and heartbroken. Her crime for the grim punishment was falling in love. In the days following her no-show wedding, she had a psychological breakdown. She was committed to a psychiatric ward for a few months before she had to be moved to another state to live with a distant relative. I never saw her smile again. As a kid, it was hard to fully understand what had happened. All I heard was that she was a victim of an online scam. But her story left an impression that followed me deep into my adult years. Online scams occur on different levels, but fundamentally, the patterns are the same. The perpetrators lay a dark and intricate web of deceit that entraps their victims using all, or most of the markers associated with dark psychology. They set the bait, and when the victim bites, they create a false sense of security. This allows them to further manipulate the victim into doing exactly what they want before they go in for the kill. Despite the reports and general awareness created about online scams, a lot of people still fall victims to these fraudsters every day. This got me thinking. It is not just online scams. We also see this in our everyday lives. People in dysfunctional relationships with partners who use them in the most obvious ways, but they continue to stay in those relationships because they seem to be under some kind of spell. We see kids make friends with people who influence them in terrible ways, and despite the solid home training they have, they make the wrong choices over and over again. Their parents are helpless and baffled by the power that these so-called friends have over their kids. We tend to focus more on the terrible actions and consequences than the patterns that play out before these crimes occur, which would explain the increase in victim rates despite the widespread awareness campaigns. And that is exactly why I wrote this book. I conducted a lot of research and looked over the reports of profilers on notorious perpetrators of these crimes. I made a startling observation. There was one consistent factor in everything. The players changed, the technology was, the times progressed, but the game patterns are almost always the same. And all of these patterns are attributed to dark psychology. So to help you and the ones you love protect yourselves, and consequently build a strong mental and emotional defense against such influences, this book, Dark Psychology, The Practical Uses and Best Defenses of Psychological Warfare in Everyday Life, was born. Part 1. Fundamental Facts about Dark Psychology. What is dark psychology? It cannot be seen, cannot be felt, cannot be heard, cannot be smelt. It hides behind stars and under hills and empty holes it fills. It comes first and follows after. Ends life, kills laughter. J.R.R. Tolkien, The Hobbit. The mind is one of the most complex aspects of human nature. The workings of the mind are something that has both puzzled and intrigued mankind for as long as we can remember. Philosophers, psychologists, and scientists have sought to unravel the mysteries of the mind. It is a generally held belief that the human mind influences our behavior and actions. So, a lot of research work has gone into understanding the mental process that a person undergoes before taking action, whether good or bad. Some attempts at studying the human mind have concentrated efforts on the brain. These studies look at the physical aspects of the brain with a focus on how information is acquired, processed, interpreted, and stored. Essentially, they hope to get a better understanding of how the brain can affect a person's way of reasoning. It is studies like these that has paved the way for progress in managing debilitating conditions like Alzheimer, perception difficulties, and even memory loss. The more familiar aspect of the study of the human mind is psychology. At some point in our lives, we have either consulted a psychologist or we have known someone who had to consult with one in order to navigate our tougher emotional battles. A lot of times, life's experiences breaks us down in ways we cannot fix on our own. Sometimes the breakdown is as a result of certain biological markers we inherited from our parents. Emotions like depression, anxiety, and fear darken our daily experiences, making it difficult to thrive. With a combination of drugs and therapy, we are able to protect ourselves from the darkness within. But what about the darkness in others? Everyone has the capacity of doing great good. We also possess the ability to do great evil. Beneath emotions like sadness, depression, joy, and happiness is a deep-seathed desire that can lead us to deliberately harm others if those urges are not brought under control. These darker desires are rooted in more primitive instincts, like our flight or fight response, that promotes our survival. Sometimes there is only one word that qualifies the human response to these dark emotions: evil. Dark psychology is a study of the human condition in relation to the psychological nature of humans to prey on others. In lay terms, dark psychology explores that aspect of human nature that allows us deliberately and willfully take actions that bring harm to our fellow humans. Mind you, the use of prey in this context does not necessarily translate into the physical harming of a person, although there is a branch of dark psychology that is dedicated entirely to this. In subsequent chapters, we will touch briefly on those areas to get a better understanding of the topic. In movies or books, you may have come across words or phrases alluding to a darkness within. Even some of the most famous philosophers made references to this. The revered book of the Christians talks about how the heart of man is desperately wicked. We have all encountered that one individual who we have described as exceptionally calm or reserved in social settings only. For this same individual to perpetrate an act so devious that we find it difficult to associate that act with this individual in question. Sometimes we are that individual. As surprising as it may seem, it is not entirely shocking. Those cases are just triggered responses to external situations. The pot was stirred, so to speak, and those dark emotions that hid beneath simmered to the surface. Usually they recede once control is exerted. Everyone has a latent tendency to be a bit naughty or just downright evil if the right buttons are pushed. Some other individuals, on the other hand, are fully in control of these dark emotions. They nurture them, feed them, and when it serves their own purposes, they willfully unleash them at the expense of another person. Sometimes these emotions are groomed from an early age. A child learns that if he or she cries in a certain way, the adults in their lives rush to do their bidding. If the parents do not impress on the child early enough the wrongness of this, the child grows up thinking people in their lives can be manipulated into doing their bidding. The crying would cease to be a weapon as they grow, but they would continue in their manipulative ways. Where they don't use tears, they use emotions to blackmail their victims. So, what started out as an innocent childish behavior becomes a dark need to control. The lengths that this individual would go to exert their control would define the intensity of their actions. Dark psychology is all about studying the thought process of a person like this. It seeks to understand the motive behind these actions, the patterns exhibited from before these acts are carried out to after, and throws more light on how a person can willfully see those actions to conclusion, knowing the hurt and pain it might cause to another individual. Dark psychology illuminates the dark side of human nature. The effects and impact of dark psychology. When you light a candle, you also cast a shadow. Ursula K. Le Guin. Given the little we now understand about dark psychology, we know that some of the most shocking criminal offenses are rooted in certain personality traits related to dark psychology. But that is a broader side effect. I want to bring it closer to home, to you and me. How does this dark psychology affect us? If it even affects us at all? I can assure you that there are no ifs to this question, and in a few short moments, we would understand how. The effects of dark psychology are experienced by both the perpetrator and the victim. To know the impacts, we need to explore some elements of dark psychology. People who exhibit certain personality traits that are considered dark, such as narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism, are prone to experiencing difficulties in all aspects of their relationships. If all three traits are present in one person, they have a higher propensity to commit a crime. The three personality traits mentioned have specific characteristics that are grouped under them. Narcissism, for instance, is characterized by a sense of entitlement, feelings of superiority, deep-seated envy of the success of others, and exploitative behavior. Psychopathy has an absence of guilt, lack of empathy, destructive impulsive behavior, egocentricity, and inability to accept responsibility as some of the characteristics. Selfishness, ruthlessness, and manipulative behaviors are indicators of Machiavellian traits. Separately, these traits are problematic, but put together, they can spell trouble, especially in a person's relationship with others. In the workplace, for instance, that person would underperform in the office, even with the most mundane tasks, disrupt workflow due to their inability to get along with others, would be intensely disliked by others. Their impulsivity would lead them to making questionable decisions that are not ethical. If put in an administrative capacity, they are more likely to commit but it is not just their work relationships that suffer. In their personal relationships, they are bound to encounter the following problems. Their constant need for attention and validation can be exhausting for their partner, resulting in faster expiration dates on relationships. They resort to physical and emotional blackmails in order to manipulate their partners. They tend to be either verbally, emotionally, or physically abusive with their partners or children. People who get into relationships with them pay a high emotional cost. If you have encountered a person whose relationships are characterized by these experiences, for the sake of your sanity and general well-being, steer clear of them. If, on the other hand, you are the one who experiences this, seek the psychological help you need to get better. No matter how deep-rooted these problems are, you can improve your behavior and experiences with the right form of therapy. The first step is recognizing the situation for what it is, acknowledging that you have a problem, and seeking help promptly. For the rest of us, dealing with people who have the traits I mentioned above leaves us emotionally and mentally drained. Sometimes the effect can be physical, and in extreme cases, fatal. The sweet neighbor whose terrible experience led me on this journey to writing this book lost everything physically. Her home, her business, her finances, but her loss was much deeper and greater than these. We didn't have a relationship with the perpetrator of the act, but we became victims as well. Our losses were not as monumental as hers, but we experienced loss too. For starters, we lost our sweet neighbor. She didn't die, but she never recovered from the experience. We lost our ability to trust strangers. Even our relationships with each other seemed to require an additional layer of trust to thrive. The biggest impact of dark psychology on anyone is that it produces a strong sense of loss. We lose our valuables. We lose relationships. We lose ourselves. I will explain that in a bit. And for those who are extremely unfortunate, they lose their lives. All things considered, it is safe to say that the impact of this darkness is profound. According to experts, if a person exhibits one of the dark personality traits, there is a very high tendency that the person would exhibit the others. In general society, if the larger members of the society exhibit these traits, it is safe to say that the crime perpetration rates in that society would be significantly high. That is not to say that people living in cities or countries with higher crimes are more criminally inclined. There are other contributing factors to be considered, but the prospect cannot be entirely ruled out either. One thing that cannot be ruled out, though, is the ripple effect of actions directly related to or as a result of dark personality traits. There are certain destructive behaviors that turn victims into predators as well, and this cycle continue well into the future until someone plucks up the courage and takes the bold step to break free. Children from abusive homes, for instance, more often than not grow up to be abusers. In some cases, in their attempt to break away from their parental mold, they find themselves trapped in equally abusive relationships, even if they are not the abusers themselves. It is almost as if they have a very strong gravitational pull towards the violent elements that characterized their childhood home. For some others, becoming victims can have such a tremendous impact on their psyche that it causes something inside of them to snap. I have read that the snapping can be temporary. In a brief moment, they lose all control over their primitive instincts and act purely on the strongest emotion that surfaces, which is usually anger. This condition is what causes some people to plead temporary insanity. But there are people who embrace the dark emotions that surface when they snap. All sense of morality goes out the window. The aftermath of this is usually devastating. Day-to-day examples of different aspects of dark psychology. I am terrified of this dark thing that sleeps in me. All day, I feel its soft feathery turnings, its malignity. Sylvia Plath, Ariel. When you think of dark behavior, you would be forgiven for thinking that it only applies to any crime that lands you on the front page of the dailies or becomes a feature-length film on the Crime Channel. In reality, it also includes quite a number of things that have generally become socially acceptable, even if we do not condone such behavior personally. We witness these actions in our homes, schools, offices, and thanks to innovative technology, we now see it on the internet. To help you get a clearer picture and hopefully a deeper understanding of this subject, and to tell you how close to home these actions are, I am going to share with you some of the most sensational crime stories and the seemingly inconsequential actions that led to a terrible end. Case Study 1. News. Brutal murder of a 14-year-old boy. Traits of the perpetrator: controlling, abusive, manipulative, reclusive. Channel: online gaming. This was the tragic story of a young boy from a well-grounded home. He had the same privileges of any teenager in the same age and social group. He had a supportive mom and a dad who strived to provide. His mother took all the necessary precautions a mother would to protect her boy from the invasive world of the internet. Online gaming was just another thing any teenage boy would indulge in. As long as he didn't spend more than the appropriate time on it, he should be fine. But the perpetrator, who was only 4 years older, had sinister plans. By carefully manipulating his young and impressionable victim with lies, he tricked the boy into visiting him at his place, where he committed the vicious crime. It was one of the most disturbing cases, especially when you consider the age of the victim and the perpetrator. However, regardless of his age, the perpetrator exhibited all the predatory traits linked to dark psychology and snuffed out life just to assert control. Case Study 2. News. Worst domestic violence case. Traits of the perpetrator: physically abusive, manipulative, controlling. Channel: relationship. Love indeed is a beautiful thing. When you enter into a relationship with someone, you enter with the hopes that this person would love and care for you, that you would nurture and protect each other. In the modern love language, it is you and the person against the world. And indeed, it started out this way in this relationship. A single mom working hard to care for and provide for her son met this charming man who was basically what she had always prayed for in a man. He was charming, considerate, and seemed to love her boy just as much as he loved her. In order to fully make himself available for this young family, he quit his job and devoted himself to caring for her until his true dark nature emerged. Using her love for her family, he manipulated her into isolating herself from those closest to her. He orchestrated the loss of her job, which resulted in the loss of her home. This ensured that she was entirely dependent on him. He relocated her to his own apartment, where she was constantly subjected to round-the-clock torture that involved some of the most inhumane treatments. His careful manipulation of the woman is so effective that when he gave her the option of how she would like to be killed, she actually mulled the thought over because she felt she had no choice and deserved no better. Chance and an act of bravery on her part led to her rescue and incarceration of the perpetrator.